Aloha, friends and neighbors. There was never a good war or a bad peace. Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin. There are some that say I'm a reincarnation of Ben. We share the same sun, 26.5 Capricorn. Venus, 4-5 Capricorn. A lot of our charts are kind of similar. And I've kind of paralleled his life in many ways. I was very involved in fire safety, Honolulu, trying to organize the fire departments into a cohesive thing, military, industrial, civic. I did a lot of things that Ben did. Here's another image of Ben. He does have Venus in the sun in Capricorn. He is a lusty old goat. Now, he was an astrologer, a very good astrologer, as I'm about to show you. So this is the way I know Ben. Hard at work on his almanac, counting the squares and the trines, predicting the weather a whole year in advance by how the planets were aligned. That's what he did in his almanac. This is how I think of Ben, my brother. This is his famous fur cap. You know, he was more famous in France than he was in America, although, on the most prevalent book in America at the time was the Bible. The second most one was Poor Richard's Almanac. That was Ben Franklin's little book. Every year he published it for 25 years. In France, he was known as a natural man, like, Thoreau and Emerson and the heroes of the French Revolution, the natural men. And so he never put on any airs, and his fur cap was worn in France, and people flocked to him when they saw him. I mean, he was a real hero to the French Revolution. The Revolution had much to do with Ben Franklin, as our Revolution did. Yep. Let's face it, it was Ben that took out a lot of the most famous line of all, was, "We find these truths to be self-evident." That's Aquarian thinking, Ben. Of course, in our, quote, modern world, shame to the age we live in, Ben said, for throwing out astrology. But in our modern world, he's known a lot for his humor. Old boys have their playthings as well as young ones. The difference is only in the price. Ben didn't do these illustrations. These were Norman Rockwell's from a book. The first book I found on Ben Franklin's saying was all about his sayings and humor. Not one word on astrology. They even didn't call it astrology. They called it astronomy. And back in those days, we're talking 15 years ago, I didn't notice on these pictures they were holding the almanac. I finally got a hold of a real almanac just a year ago, and 1733 is when he started publishing them. Neither a fortress nor a maidenhead will hold out long after they begin to parley. Most of you will know this one. Fish and visitors stink after 3 days. Of course, Ben was always there battling the king, And they didn't like the royalty much, like the French Revolution, American Revolution. They figured the age of kings was over. It's the age of man. The royal crown cures not the headache. In other words, kings are just like people. They get headaches too. Ben had a subtle way of teaching, very subtle, a wry sense of humor with a little bite. The golden age was never the present age. That applies to our times too, doesn't it? There's more old drunkards than old doctors. Ben said, "Beer proves God loves us and wants us to be happy." Said man's best friend was a loyal old wife and a loyal old dog. Here's a beauty. One good husband is worth 2 good wives. For the scarcer things are, the more they're valued. Good husbands are scarce. He always makes you think a little bit, doesn't he? Love your neighbor, yet don't pull down your hedge. Cut wood, carry water. Here's a young Ben Franklin instructing a blacksmith how to build a better stove. A better wood stove was an obsession. If he had to cut wood, he wanted to burn it efficiently. And that's what he did. He redesigned the old cast iron stoves. It wasn't that Ben championed alcoholism. No, just the opposite. It was a waste of money. The way that Ben finally escaped from his brother's sweatshop printing shop, there was 10 apprentices or something, and Ben was one of them, and every morning they drank a quart of beer before work. Then they had a break at 9 or 10, drank another quart. Then they had lunchtime at 1 o'clock, they drank 2 quarts of beer. Then at the end of the day at 3, 4 o'clock, they drank another quart of beer. So what Ben did is he stopped drinking beer. He didn't put his pennies in the beer pot for all the guys to buy their beer. And he started saving his beer money. And the other apprentices didn't like that. Not because he didn't contribute to the pot, but because he wasn't drinking all that beer, he just naturally did more work. He was doing twice the work of all the other apprentices. And they had to tell him, slow down, you're making us look bad. Anyway, he saved up all his beer money until he had enough to buy his own little shop. Now, I got a lot of the Poor Richard's sayings from this book, which was a tabletop book and had none of the astrology in it, but just had, all of the wise sayings for each month. And it's really fun. I mean, you can just pick it up and read it like a Bible, and here's some wise saying that will teach you good. When befriended, remember it. When you befriend, forget it. Ha ha. Great souls with generous pity melt, which coward tyrants never felt. Oh boy. Who knows a fool must know his brother, for one will recommend another. Enjoy thy time well, if thou meanest to gain leisure. A flatterer never seems absurd. The flattered always takes his word. Always take his word. Lend money to an enemy, and thou wilt gain him. To a friend, and thou wilt lose him. Oh boy. Well, this is a great little book, illustrated and all. But you know what? They took out all the astrology. It's been a conspiracy. And the publisher even says the text preserves the typographical flavor, but they took out all the, important stuff. The astrology of it, the technical things. And the guy doesn't hardly apologize for it at all. Here in the introduction, he says, changes of the moon, prognostications about the weather, recipes, jokes, maxims, cautionary rhymes. Peddlers carried them in their packs. Excuse me, I wasn't looking. There, here's the publisher's note, and he doesn't even mention what's going on there. He says, they were sometimes paid for in wheat and potatoes, handful of nails, or a bottle of rum. But Poor Richard reached 1 in every 100 of the population. More than that. More than that, folks. And along with the funny little jokes, there was always in the introduction a real lecture on something that was educational. Here, look at this. He says, only the astronomical data and other factual pieces are omitted. However, the text preserves the flavor. Ah, boo, publisher. But at least he got something out. At least he got something out. Of course, he just added to the problem that nobody believes that Ben was an astrologer. Of course, he called himself Richard Saunders. Ben he never signed his own name to anything. No. So Richard Saunders was the so-called astrologer that wrote Poor Richard's Almanac. This is 1751 almanac. But in the early ones, Ben apologized and said that, his wife was going to throw him out if he didn't make some money with his instruments. He spent all his time with the instruments looking at the planets. But here in 1751, he says, now the noble art, the astrology, he says, is dwindled into contempt. No other use is made of our learned labors. Find the best time of cutting corns. The mischief we owe in a great measure to ourselves, the ignorant herd of mankind, had they not been encouraged to it by some of us, would never have dared to deprecate our sacred dictates. But Urania had been betrayed by her own sons. Amongst them was the Newtons, Haleys, and Wistons, who condemned and abused her, contrary to the light of their own wisdom. Shame to the age we live in, Ben said. It's even worse now, Ben. Okay, here's a real almanac. He did this for 25 years. If I do my show for 25 years, I'll get to show 1300. But it's pocket size, you notice. Very easy to carry around, and a lot of people did. And where is contained the lunations, eclipses, judgment of the weather? And boy, did he. Now, when you look at each page here, well, here's, first of all, how the astrology rules the body. When the moon's in a certain sign, that's when you treat that part of the body. He has a list of the planets, the 5 aspects. He teaches you a lot of basic stuff. And here, every day, he gives you the goodies. Look at that. Here's rain, and Jupiter gives rain. Here's sextile to Mars and Venus. And here's the sun entering Aries. Here's a trine from Jupiter to Venus. Here's a conjunction of the moon, Venus and the sun. So you see, he's listing the aspects. Here's Mercury and Saturn. And so here you get what the planets are doing, and the date and the time. And then over here, you get little wise sayings interspersed with, but here's windy but warm. So, he's doing a lot of the weather prediction, kind of like I do. Up on top, the sayings of Poor Richard. I mean, this is an amazing little thing here. Darnest thing, when I looked through here, what I found was these things about the 7 stars. And I started researching, and what are the 7 stars? Okay, the 7 stars, he lists the rising and setting of, and something called south. And they're the Pleiades. Yes, the 29 Taurus. Now, I have the Pleiades on my rising sign, so I want to know why he did this. Apparently, all the people, at that time knew what that meant. He lists the Pleiades like it was a planet. Wow, Ben, what are you doing? I got more research to do. I got to find out what he knew about the Pleiades, and I don't know. Well, for the last 20 years, I've been, saying Ben Franklin was a great astrologer, and it wasn't until even 5 years ago I finally got a hold of a real almanac. But to find this, it just popped up. I don't even know how I discovered it. Wow, it was wonderful. I'll show you the website shortly. But for now, America's greatest astrologer. And what they say here, these guys, kind of blows me away. It says, all over the internet, skeptics and haters of astrology are aggressively lying about Benjamin Franklin and astrology. Oh, really? Here's a kindred soul. I've been bitching about this for 25 years. Unfortunately, skeptics dominate the internet, so almost every site claims Ben was not an astrologer. But below is incontrovertible evidence that makes it obvious Ben was not only an astrologer, he was a devoted astrologer. Ben Franklin was publisher and sole writer for Poor Richard's Almanac. So you click on these things and you'll see the real almanac. I'm going to show you. All of the images displayed in the above links are from pages of Poor Richard's Almanac. Ben Franklin not only published Poor Richard's Almanac, but he also wrote every word of it. And he did so for dozens of years, 25 actually. Poor Richard's Almanac was the most famous publication in the colonies while it was being published. The most famous in the colonies. At one skeptic's internet site acknowledged that there was astrology content in Poor Richard's astrology content in Poor Richard's Almanac, but the site claims that this does not prove Benjamin Franklin was an astrologer, citing that the Washington Post publishes a horoscope, but this does not mean the Post editors believe in horoscopes. And I think the response here, that's really a dumb analogy, the guy says. The Washington Post editors did not write their horoscopes. Ben Franklin himself, Ben Franklin himself wrote all the astrology material in Poor Richard's Almanac. In fact, Poor Richard's Almanac is predominantly astrological material. You've seen it on here. And even provided an ephemeris. Yes, that's what it was for each year, informing its readers of the astrological position of each planet and the alignments for each day, the squares and trines for each day of the year. And Ben actually calculated these positions in advance, which proves he was an extraordinary, skilled astrologer and mathematician. Wow. It's really nice. Not only do they acknowledge what I've been saying all these years, but, they pointed out that they're skeptics and haters. And I've run into a few of them, too, that just tried to laugh that Ben Franklin was a really fine astrologer. He was, Okay, now, I must warn you that the Magi Society has a lot of commercial stuff up on their websites, and they sell a lot of, kind of popcorn astrology, financial and love, and there's all sorts of stuff they do, but can't help but be impressed over their knowledge of Ben Franklin. Now, I'm not recommending this. They got a lot of products here, and a lot of it looks like the old fishy. Get your lucky number. But when I start looking into it, there's some meat here. Now, this one in particular, this says, look how the planets were aligned. I mean, this goes, Ben Franklin was one of the reasons that I easily discovered the birth time of the United States government. Click here to learn how Benjamin Franklin used astrology to create the United States. Boy, that's pretty straightforward. Let's see what happens. Ben Franklin used astrology to select the date to sign the Declaration of Independence. Now, most of these guys, they start on the July 4th to sign the Declaration, but the last guy didn't dribble in until 2 in the morning, July 5th. And I know exactly what Ben was doing and what he was setting up, but these guys are saying that he was a Mason and that was a big deal. Whoops, excuse me, I wasn't watching the screen very well. Click here for proof that Ben Franklin was an astrologer. There we go. Click here to view the first example of the astrology Ben used. Huh. Oh, this is the one I copied. Okay, look at that. There is a real almanac. And just like the one I have, this one's more watermarked. But here's all look at there's the Moon, Venus conjunct Saturn, and examples, and over here is his little wise writings, and up at the top, and mainly this is a day-by-day ephemeris. Yeah, here's the sun and here's the moon. Here are the aspects. So this is pretty neat. Everything on the page, they say, is astrological information and data or comments about astrology. Ben did this, for 25 years. And these guys nailed it. I mean, this is wonderful for me to see that somebody else got it and knows what the proof is, just like I have done myself. Can't beat this, huh? Wow. Okay, here's the second example on their website. See, these guys are using 1753. I only have the one copy, but there's some interesting things here. In this case, he was really into eclipses. And I noticed that on the one ephemeris, the one Poor Richard I have, a big deal about eclipses. But this is something I hadn't seen in mine. Here he's talking about Mercury, a little black dot, which goes across the sun, and how to calculate, very complicated calculations here, of when that will happen exactly. Proving Ben's acumen as a mathematician and as an astrologer. Wow, neat stuff. All right, here's the third example on the website. Now this whole thing here, these are instructions about how to make a model so you can better understand. Ben's talking about he puts a candle in the middle of the table, and then there's a wire and an apple. He uses an apple and a candle and moves around the table, and pretty soon you understand some very deep astronomy and astrology. And yeah, wow, great stuff. Here's the planets' positions. Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, and the moon. And here's a nice little one of his. Now these writings I know about. And he didn't write all of these. No, he had a book of wise sayings that he took out of it, and Ben never signed his name to anything himself. So a lot of these wise sayings and stuff came from other wise men, and Ben just took them and used them. Benjamin Franklin, a fine astrologer, was there. He was not happy when I went from Taurus rising over into Gemini. He knew the rising sign. He knew it was changing. And suddenly we had a Gemini government and not a Taurus. If Taurus was the ruler, Venus and Jupiter and the sun all in the second house, we'd be much richer in this country. Yeah.